Once I realized that this whole terrain, this whole domain is the boundaries of my personality, boundaries of my individuality, this is what healthy developed ego, it's encompassing in itself the idiosyncrasies of myself. It encompassing in itself likes and dislikes. It encompasses the recognition of others' fallibilities and others' greatness. And I am above all else recognizing all that within myself as an arbiter of this, what is being then, of course, scrutinized by the mind, because that's what minds here is for. It scrutinizes. So spiritual arrogance is not different than any other arrogance. Spiritual arrogance comes from days. A bit of a background. I have yet to attend a live immersion with you, but I have followed your work for over a year, often listening to your teachings on YouTube, which have helped me find grounding amidst my inner experiences. A few years ago, I was unexpectedly thrust into what some call the dark night of the soul. This profound challenge compelled me to deepen my spiritual practice, as it felt like the only way forward. At times, I experienced bliss that feels like light penetrating every cell of my being, bringing tears, but also a sense that my body cannot fully contain it, causing it to subside. While these experiences are liberating, I sometimes question whether what I perceive as progress is purely spiritual arrogance, stories my mind creates to inflate self-importance. Being very intelligent, observant, and sensitive to energies, I've often felt a sense of superiority over others. This arrogance makes me doubt my sincerity on the spiritual path. Question, or rather questions. My question is related to this presumed spiritual arrogance and feeling of superiority, thus distancing me from others unnecessarily. Through comparison, could you give some insights into how to remedy that? Do I have a blind spot and I cannot see something obvious? Yeah, just that. Well, it's a kind of a funny catch-22. It's a kind of funny, if it was a blind spot, you wouldn't have brought it as an open question, right? And I'm not gonna just like stroke your sense of what you brought here. Nor do I want to ruffle you, and run it against the hair growth, right? I don't want to kind of ruffle you unnecessarily, even if it's tempting. But it's funny that it's just simply funny how it takes someone who is already humble to detect and see clearly when one is arrogant. You see? And someone who is oozing with arrogance very often completely oblivious to that. I mean, you can go and find your reassurance in the good old Carl Jung, who will simply show you that, I don't know whether Jung built on that or not, but that there is opposite psychology. That there is this reversed psychology. Reversed psychology is often used to complement, or rather compensate. That's what I meant, not compliment, compensate. You see? So when people attempt to appear as being modest, for example, right? It's very often heralds and signals the fact that they are self-aggrandizing inside, but they cannot be that way because they feel that's socially unacceptable. You know, that is Leo Tolstoy, who in his letters coined the phrase which I adopted already in my early 30s. Something along the lines, because I'm translating him from Russian. Without pseudo-modesty. Okay? I want to tell you this without pseudo sense of modesty. That's how Tolstoy referred to that notion of modesty. So now, maybe I'm going completely somewhere else with this, and you are asking something else. Arrogance is very often, the arrogance that you speak of, is a result of the first degree and level of acknowledgement of one's capacities and gifts. Okay? That can be related to artist, warrior, anyone in any field who feels because he is good, he knows he is good, she knows he is good. It's like this girl. She's 18 or 25, and she knows she is bloody good looking, and she has her way with that. Nothing you can do about that. Okay? So God granted her with this physiology, with these looks. It will take some time before that arrogance wanes off, hopefully, and that what was annoying will come up as a more of a tamed, hopefully outgrown understanding that this is just a form, also temporarily form. This form may not last in the same way. It's fleeting. Maybe by mid-30s, that already begins to show its way. You see? I'm giving this drastic example, very primitive in a way, popular example. But that kind of arrogance is justified. I don't want you to kick yourself in the groins for that kind of arrogance, because I know this from direct experience, which I have known since I was very young. I would even say since my teenage years. When I realize that I'm good in this group, in that group, let's say I'm good at what I do, comes with an arrogance, you see? And you can't ask teenager to tame down that arrogance because, well, to begin with, his ego is not even fully developed. His sense of self is still developing. It will take some time until it will be incorporated into a greater levels. And levels, meaning here, are beginning to all encompassing that what prior to that was out of necessity, defined by the boundaries. So that arrogance was kind of self-protecting arrogance, which as the boundaries begin to get expanded, no longer needed to be there, so we lay them down. So laying down these boundaries, because we're simply going beyond that self-built fortress to protect that territory. We no longer need to do that. We suddenly own that territory. When I own that territory, I don't need to sit in the fort, right, and making sure that no attack is being left without and some, due responses. Once I realize that this whole terrain, this whole domain is the boundaries of my personality, boundaries of my individuality, this is what healthy developed ego, it's encompassing in itself the idiosyncrasies of myself. It encompassing in itself likes and dislikes. It encompasses the recognition of others' fallibilities and others' greatness. And I am above all else recognizing all that within myself as an arbiter of this, what is being then, of course, scrutinized by the mind, because that's what minds here is for. It scrutinizes. So spiritual arrogance is not different than any other arrogance, you see? I can tell you also that from my personal experiences, when that, let's say, first flavor, that first taste, when it first was fully there, I felt when I walked on the ground as if my feet don't even touch it. And of course, I often looked at others as kind of these sleepwalkers, as maybe not zombies, that would be exaggeration, but very often seeing through people, seeing through all these dramas, petty talks, petty conversations. Of course, it will fill me with arrogance. And I was already, let's say, mature enough in my development to know that that arrogance in itself is a phase. It's not there to stay. I knew that that arrogance is still a sign of the green, immature phase of that awakening. You see? So this is why I said I don't want to stroke you and to caress you so as to kind of pacify you. But at the same time, I don't feel like, what, if it was blind spot, you would have never brought that as a question. Trust me. People cannot bring this out into the open if it's a blind spot. By definition, it cannot be seen. The fact that you are pondering on that, reflecting on that, that in itself shows that there is already some grinding. There's already some possibility for energetic expansion and laying down these boundaries, because it is always down to boundaries with which our consciousness willing to identify. That's what this is all about. When we're not willing to identify with something, that's when we erect boundary. That's when we create boundary. You see? And then we begin to protect. Then, of course, it's a matter of how much invested we are. What is at stake here? What is being violated? Am my boundaries being violated? If I feel my boundaries are being violated, of course, I'll put up ferocious fight. This is how it functions. But if I feel non-violated, then I will not fight. I will be able to win these fights without wielding my sword, without lifting a finger. You see? That's by definition is what spiritual arrogance is, and what that spiritual arrogance also dissolves into, fizzles away. So I wouldn't worry too much about this, okay? But I would encourage you to find your way to our immersions, because you mentioned that here, and it is my job to tell you that, the real deal is there. This is just the warm-up. This is just like, getting acquainted in that format. So something else I'll touch upon, because you also, in your background, not in your question, you were pondering whether all this is somehow, what's the words that you use here? You didn't use the word mental projections. This is how I'm using it now. But you said something, stories my mind creates to inflate self. It's a nature of the progress. It's a progressive nature of any cognition. Okay, so this is why you need to come to the programs to learn methodologies of how at will remaining at the level of cognition and perception when the mental capacity is, as it were, capacitated or incapacitated at will. So we don't fall victims to that, what mind does here, simply driven by propensity. That's all. Mind is a commentator. Okay? It's a commentator of anything. Commentator of the drama, commentator of a sports event, commentator of the tea ceremony when everything should be silent, for God's sake. It comments. It likes to add comments, you see? When something is beautiful, you don't need to say, oh, how beautiful. Like, you know, take a spoonful of sugar and say, sweet sugar. No, we don't do that. It's obvious. And that's what mind is. Mind adds sugar on top of already a beautifully sweet enough cake. So don't worry about that. What you said here is where every cell of your being feel that bliss. Stay with that. Don't worry about the comments.